individual countries. And how is that different for you, filtering for, English being the primary language and any other language?
Yeah, there is some misconception out there, I believe. I believe you asked me, right? Because there was already in the picture for a second. Okay. It is still early for me, so bear with me. Yeah, I think there is some misconception out there. Back in the day, obviously, spam filters worked by looking at primarily at strings and trying to understand the content of an email. That is no longer necessarily the case. Today, AI or ML models really generally just look at patterns within emails. They're also trying to understand the context of an email rather than the content, like who's actually sending the email, who's reading the email. The letter is more important as well. What does engagement look like? What do our users tell us about the email? And for that, we don't have to even know what is in the email, right? The content is more and more irrelevant. So the notion of that we really look at words within an email, like spammy words or strings or subjects, that is not really the case anymore. And as such, the language of the email doesn't matter. It really just comes down to really understanding, or the machine being able to recognize those patterns. And it's more important that, things like simple things, seemingly simple things like understanding double byte, UTF-16, and being able to handle that stuff correctly. That is more important nowadays than really language itself. So the shorter version of the answer to your question is language is not important.
Okay, and false positives?
It's the same, right?
Because me being on the sender side, I have experienced the false positives with languages that were really close to each other, and that the AI wasn't really sure whether it's maybe a misspelled Russian or is it some other language, maybe Bulgarian.
Yeah, the problem there is probably sample size of recipients or language. So especially when we talk about certain languages in Europe, right? ML, as we all know, works best if you have enough data and a lot of data that the models actually work. And when we go from very small sample size for senders versus very small sample size of receivers, which might be dictated by language in some cases, then you might have a problem for ML models, which are working with usually larger sets of data. Then they tend to make a not so good decision, I would say.
Okay, thank you. Well, essentially, you touched on this, that back in the day, it was very much word-oriented. I know that the German word credit, because it's spelled with K, used to be considered as an obfuscation of credit. Arne, do you see any such issues when teaching your models to mostly German? And are there possibly differences between German in Switzerland, Austria, and Germany?
In general, I don't want to repeat what Marcel said, but it might be the case that back in the day it was much more dependent on the actual content or subject lines or whatever, and specific words in there and keywords. But like Marcel mentioned, that isn't the case anymore. But to answer your question, yes, there are differences even within the German market between the two brands, WebDE and GMX, but it's more in the user behavior. So the user customer base from WebDE is slightly different than it is for GMX. They choose for maybe differences in the product features, the one brand or the other, and then you have a slightly different set of customers that might react differently to emails. So it might be the case that you reach an audience at the one brand a little bit better than the audience on the other brand because it attracts different people. And so is it for the German markets. There is quite a lot of also very small brands, one that focus very strongly on being economic friendly or being very, very deeply into data privacy and security. And so all these brands attract different customers, and so the customer behavior, the engagement with the email sender might be differently, and so you might as a sender see different behavior, opens, reads, clicks, whatever, to some degree between brands. And of course, Mail.com brand is or the customer base of Mail.com, where we have a very international customer base, is different than from Web.de, which is main focus on the German market. But like Marcel said, it's more like, is it the right content and context for this user in that time where you send your email or where the user wants to read that email, and how does he interact with the sender? So it's much more important to focus on your brand and your authentication for that matter, than on if you're using credit or credit. Of course, you should use it in the language you are sending, but you cannot say that credit is a spammy word, like you can't say for Bitcoin. Well, it's legal to trade Bitcoin, and there are good marketplaces and good services behind it, and there's a lot of crap and spam and false news around Bitcoin. So we cannot filter by Bitcoin as a word, but we can measure reputation and whatnot of whom is sending, or who is sending to whom, and how our customers interact with that.
Okay, you mentioned that Web.de and GMX have a different type of customers. Does that mean
a little bit, yes.
Does that mean that you have different machine learning models for two services, or that doesn't matter? It's not that big of a difference.
It depends. I cannot say it's that case or it's the other case. It's a different machine learning model or different setup here and there. It's slightly differences, and it's also some product differences. For example, on Web.de you can have a three-way spam protection, which quite a lot of customers still use, even though it's no longer offered when you register a new account. And on GMX you have a two-way spam protection. So what is a three-way spam protection? That means if you heavily use your address book, your contact book, then you can have them in a separate view, for example, than your normal email. And then you have the spam folder and the normal inbox, so to say. And that's not the case on GMX, and that makes a difference in the user behavior on the email. And so it might be the case that a model or a calculation of reputation is trained differently between the brands. But in general, you can say if there's a brand that is really bad on GMX, then it's also pretty bad on the other brands, and same is for good brands. It might be to some degree that there are differences.
Okay. David, your company is one of the few mailbox providers who managed to keep Google at bay, and you still dominate the Czech market. Google not being dominant here, you having 70% market share. How does that impact your product development? How does that affect your spam filtering and all of this?
I totally agree what was said before. Language regarding anti-spam doesn't matter now. Used to matter in the past, but now it's everything about reputation things and technical stuff that is binded to anti-spam or bend to the rules of participant. So it doesn't really matter in which language you operate. I believe so. And regarding Gmail, I think we partly benefit from the past, but we were first here in Czech Republic. And of course, to be honest, we are trying to do our best to keep the service as simply as could be. So that may be our recipe for the success.
Okay, so I mentioned market dominance. Not many know that Yahoo is the dominant provider in Romania. Marcel, how is that? How did that happen? Where is that coming from?
I don't know. I don't have a specific answer for that. But if we really look at the history of the brands we host and own, right, and how we entered certain markets at what points in time, and also you just mentioned Chesnam is still larger than Google. Sometimes it's just you're just at the right place at the right time as a brand or as a company, and that sounds weird, but it's probably correct. And in other times, you just provide a better product where you have a partnership with a local company, which could have been the case in the Yahoo case in Romania. And then you just have a